Hello and welcome back to Refinitiv Perspectives Live. We are now back at episode 12 out of 24, where we will be talking about transformation of technology. And I would like to welcome our two guests this time, which is one, Sally Eaves, founder, Aspirational Futures, and also David Oliver, lead data scientist at Refinitiv Labs. Welcome to the both of you. And thank you for taking the time and joining us today.
A pleasure. Thanks so much.
I would like to directly jump in to give our audience a bit of an overview on what's been happening and where this whole conversation is coming from. So maybe we start with you, Sally. What's your take on the biggest transformation trends coming out of 2020?
Absolutely, and a pleasure to join you both today. I think great starting question. I think for me, maybe if we start off with the acceleration in digital transformation, I think we've really had the world's maybe biggest collective experiment really around remote working and remote learning. And as we go into 2020, into more hybrid approaches to both of these, I also think we've seen a big acceleration in tech areas like hybrid cloud adoption being one of the main ones, but also areas like normalization, so AI and automation. And secondly, maybe the uptake of technology for new demographics. So for example, older users, using more alternative payment methods. I think that's a really interesting one that all the research shows that will last as well. So I think maybe as we look ahead, I think the new focus is going to be on the nuances. So around customer experience, machine experience, and really personalization of those journeys across omnichannels. And increasingly this focus on technology and broader societal impact as well. And hopefully we'll talk about that a bit later as well.
Thank you. I mean, has there been, maybe when we're talking about the whole transformation of tech in the past, let's say not only 1 year, but maybe 2 years, has there been anything you maybe didn't expect? I don't know, Oliver, David, if you want to answer to that,
Sure.
was there something that you didn't expect?
Sure. And thanks for the question and pleasure to be here. I'd say, to Sally's point, the adoption of hybrid cloud, multi-cloud is definitely something we've seen, and it's definitely accelerated. I'd say the unexpected part here was just how uniform that was across a whole range of different financial services. So, if we do touch points with a lot of different problems to be solved, and in the data science sphere, what we're seeing is these conversations are basically the same for a large range of people. If you had have asked me 2 or 3 years ago, would the uniformity been so constant across the industry, I probably would have expected to be fragmented for a little bit longer. But at the minute, everybody I think seems to be dealing with the same challenges day by day. Things like cost reduction and those are becoming known, and exactly what Sally's talking about normalization across the clouds. I think this is really important and something that I didn't see coming in the uniformity of it.
I mean, also if we're talking about the transformation in general and the normalization of cloud and different other things, where is the transformation of the skill set or of the skills along with tech? We've talked about a lot of changes that are coming up, a lot of changes throughout 2020 that will even develop and become bigger within this year. But we haven't talked so much about the skills along with the tech. Maybe you can follow up on that also.
Yeah, definitely with the skills. I get asked about this quite a lot as a data scientist. I think a lot of people are looking at just AI in general and how they have to skill up in that area. Generally, I think there's both good and bad news in that sense, and that the good news is those with the mindset of continual learning, it's a really ripe area. There's a lot of stuff out there now that don't think of anybody as being the absolute expert. We're all learning as we go, as things are changing so fast, and really that change is accelerating. So in that sense, the people that are already in the mindset of learning, I think it's very, very good. The other side of that is that there's still that base level of statistics and machine learning and programming. That's what's really driving the data science forward. And the way we like to think about it is that technology is being changed by the same technologists that have changed it for the past 20 years. So in that sense, there is that way that we could also look to them, and we know the direction that things are heading.
Absolutely. I would kind of think of that as the rise of the deep generalist. I think those kind of skill sets are really, really important. It's that holistic, breadth and depth. So I talk about STEAM learning quite a lot, and I think that's where we're moving. So STEM, don't get me wrong, massively important. We need to go broader than that. So you need those, emotional confidence, communication skills, problem solving skills. You need all of that alongside the technology ones, and that really helps you to be more adaptive. We talk about adaptive agile organizations. We need that around learning as well. So it's smart technology but smart learning. So I think this STEAM focus is going to be massively important going forward.
Is this what you're thinking about in the future, or is that what you think has happened already? Is that what you're thinking?
I think the trajectory was increasing, but I'm seeing it happening now. I'm seeing more conversations on that. And I think people, it's about being comfortable with continual change. I think people are seeing that's a state we're in, in a perennial state at the moment. And that's where we need to be able to be more confident to adapt to that. So it's also knowing how to learn, things like metacognition, knowing those processes to help people learn better, learn smarter is going to be important too. So that creative confidence, that emotional confidence to be able to adapt and continually upskill and reskill.
David, you were going to add something to that. I believe I interrupted you.
No interruption. That's a really good point you make there, Sally. I think you use the term generalist, and that's how we speak of it internally as well. And I really like your take on the way that people have to be confident in their skills as well. I think that's really important in that, I think there's a lot of that fear of missing out, and there's always some new technology that you don't know yet. We're all in the same boat, and everybody's doing the best they can. We often look for generalists now. I think maybe 10 years ago there was that attitude of there would be a niche data science team somewhere that would do the modeling for you. What we're seeing now is more that across the company culture of everyone along the whole production life cycle has to be aware of these skills to some degree, and it's more like everyone will be aware. And that generalist is what we're after then, somebody that can touch point with a lot of different people.
And when we're talking about progressing in the industry itself, what's let's say telltale sign in the things that things are progressing in the industry when it comes to large scale transformational change in technology itself? If you want to continue, David?
Sure. I think one of the big things there is what I was alluding to before, which is previously these types of conversations, particularly around tech, they were actually confined to maybe a technology team, maybe a quant team in finance, whereas now we're seeing this happening across a broad range of different areas. Business analysts and project managers are quite often involved. Even frontline sales team now, I think, understand this a lot better. And that's where you might have heard of terms like, for example, machine learning black box. That's not really a term so much anymore. Once people actually get under the hood and they can see what's going on, they realize it's not that black at all. And in fact, looking under the hood, you get a much better understanding of what's going on. So in that sense, like that cultural change is what really, to me, is the sign that this is something that's here and it's something that's going to stay.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that. And I think other areas, maybe sustainability would be a great example of that. I think we're starting to see, evolution of business models. And this is something I've been involved in for a long period of time. And it's fantastic to see kind of the narrative changing around that as well, and more demands for explainability and measuring results around these areas. So rather than being on the edge and as an add-on, these are things that are being like embedded into models, and people want reporting on it and they want clear and tangible results. So I think that's really exciting. And what David was saying there about machine learning, the skill set changes again, things like low code or lower code going into more business facing roles. We've got a lot of change happening there. And maybe also shifting around C-level as well. Going through this COVID experience, there's a lot of constraints that have been placed around costs, for example. So you've got this demand to, continually innovate, etc. But you've also got a lot of constraints on costs. So I think I've seen certainly like CFO roles, for example, greater interaction with CISO and with CEO, looking at, being more of a change agent and a strategic leader rather than just purely operational and managing those costs. So I think those alignment's been something we talk about for probably 40 years around different roles, but I think we're seeing a real shifting around that at different levels of the organization now as well.
Yeah, we have had a couple of other. We've had a couple of other episodes also where we talked about the fact that the human itself is not gone. I mean, as we're talking about technology and digitalization and apps and software solutions, machine readable news, whatever it might be, and also in terms of sustainability and what's been or being developed within tech. There's always that measurement, of course, of the human being, and when you're talking about the CFOs. Or management positions in general, it's definitely something to consider, that this is also something that you have to manage, that you have to structure again, or new, or maybe people are developing in a different kind of direction, and it's a new situation for most of them, and it doesn't happen, which is good that a crisis like this comes up. So it's not that everybody had the chance, let's say, to experience anything like that and to learn from it. David.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to probably touch on a point Sally made, as well as what you just made there about, I think that particularly higher up in the organizations now are becoming much more aware of the costs of cloud. And that's a good conversation to have, in that understanding the cost is probably one of the biggest decisions in any business. So understanding that, it's actually quite empowering, because it means people can make more long-term plans around it and have the confidence really to use it with the way it should be used. And that's actually not just the finance sector. I think that's actually in multiple sectors, and probably why we're benefiting from it.
Absolutely, and pay-as-you-grow kind of consumption models as well, which have all sorts of benefits. So, touching on sustainability again, but also helping people to invest in innovation, but do it in an incremental way that's tailored to their particular context. So I'm really liking what I'm seeing about organisations responding to that, and I think we're seeing that again, as you mentioned, David, across sectors, not just in finance, which is great to see.
You've also mentioned now the pay-as-you-grow and the changes in general. What changes have you seen in tech as a force for good? Is this, obviously this is one of them, but is there more?
Absolutely. This is an area that's a big passion of mine. Anybody watching at the minute would be aware of that. So apologies for getting that in there. But what I'm really liking at the moment is a bit of a narrative change around this as well. It's becoming more of a mainstream conversation, which I love. So I think over this period of time, people have had time to maybe pause and reflect, where's this come from? What's that supply chain? Who's been making this? And it's helped us to think a little bit more about reimagining that future. We've seen AI being used to help fight wildfires and predict where they're going to occur in the future. We've seen smart technology being used to address the COVID problem. There was something called the HPC Consortium as one example, like 11 different tech companies, lots of different universities, truly global, coming together to provide high performance computing capability. And it's kind of that ethos of collaboration rather than competition. I think there's a lot there that I hope we can take from it that will last into the future. So great examples there, but also providing, partnering with local community organizations, around food delivery, because food poverty has been a big issue. But underneath everything, I think we have to remember about equality of access to the opportunities as well. So we've seen schools where there hasn't been the right, people haven't got the right equipment at home to be able to do distance learning. There hasn't the internet connection, etc. And a lot of tech companies have stepped up to the plate with help with that. But I think going forward, that's one of the areas we really need to focus on. Because it's all very well talking about some of these really emergent technologies, but if you haven't got, mobile data access, etc., you haven't got that foundation to work from. So I think that's one of the things definitely around inclusion to take forward from this.
So these are the forces for good who are helping out in exactly these times, where you can help out not only the ones with the smartphone, with the laptop, with the computer at home, but also the ones who doesn't, or give them the hardware or the software to be able to access this, right?
Absolutely. And helping with upskilling and things like that as well. It's not all about the technology, it's donating time and skills, etc. as well. I think we've seen a real coming together around this that I hope can be a positive legacy from everything we've experienced together.
Yeah, a lot of partnerships, a lot of people who, specify in that one area and then combine the two ideas, which is really nice to see. I know what you mean. Within those processes and this whole situation and the changes and the development, obviously there's going to be a couple of challenges that we need to either overcome or that we have overcome. Maybe you can also get a bit into, or do a little deep dive into this and the challenges that we're facing or have faced, maybe.
Sure thing. I think the first thing for me would be increasing trust in technology. I think transparency is so key. So AI would probably be the classic. I think it's been one that, a lot of the media headlines are around, and the language can be quite scary, can't it, about job elimination and destruction and adjectives like that. But I think we've shown over this period of time how much of a difference tech has made and can make. It's that conduit to make change happen. So I think, for example, ensuring explainability around AI is hugely important. So not just to be fair, but to really create that perception, that genuine perception of fairness as well. Both of those are really important. I think embedding zero trust around security is also really relevant, because we've had that big increase in cybersecurity threats over the last year.
Sure.
I think maybe interoperability around technology is going to be even more important going forward with what we're seeing in terms of like IoT device increases, for example. And then maybe going forward from what David was talking around AI and machine learning, maybe looking at the next stage beyond that as well. So things like AI ops and model ops as well. As at the moment, I think it's about 90% of machine learning models don't actually make it into production. So we need to look at that waste and make sure we're not losing things here. Same way with data, 90% of data is archived and never touched again. So we need to look at that reuse and getting the most from what we've got there.
Yeah, I thought it's worth adding there, Sally. You mentioned it before about the way that people aren't really in competition in this space. Yeah, there is actually a fairly good feel, at least on the inside, and particularly around the AI and the ethics around that. We kind of feel like this is a problem that is just so much bigger than any one company, that the general attitude and the general response to it does seem to be quite broad across the industry, which is really pleasing. I mean, that's something I think, years gone past, it's an area where people were easy to be cynical about, whereas now I think we're seeing some actual genuine change in that area.
I totally agree. And things like around some of the open innovation. And we've seen some really great projects with democratization of data, for example, as well. I know there was this huge, big, like NASA data set, for example. They partnered with a big tech company and made it available for researchers across the globe. So they could do their kind of like $25 project on a data set that would be hugely, inaccessible in the past. So things like that, there's so much that can be done. So I'm really excited about that trajectory that lies ahead.
I mean, we've talked about the challenges that we have overcome so far and what comes up. Is there, I mean, David, from your opinion, maybe also, do you see any kind of challenge maybe for this year or the upcoming ones that we will have to face and overcome still that has not been overcome?
It's probably at that level, you're probably talking more about just the general economy. There's just generally, I think we're all in that bucket together again, and just finding the way forward in terms of, I think people had a pretty good plan in 2019 on where they wanted their business to be 2 years from now, and obviously a lot of that has changed, right? And so just the ability to deal with that change whilst in an accelerating technology environment, I think that's probably the biggest challenge for a lot of people right now. And I'll also say people there, to Sally's point, and I think you'll mention this before, is that it's about the people. That's where the real change is going to come from. The technology is great to have, but really, we invest in our people in a way to make sure that they're the ones that will be actually empowered to make the change.
I couldn't agree more with that. Absolutely.
Perfect. I mean, it has been super nice having you on the show. You've been very direct, very concrete, straightforward. I love the impact and the ideas that you've put in, not only my mind, but in hopefully a lot of viewers that we're having. So thank you for your time and thanks for joining us. And hopefully we're going to see you soon in maybe a broader kind of episode going a bit more into details with the both of you.
Pleasure. Absolutely. Love to.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. If you enjoyed this episode, you can download a recent machine learning survey report, The Rise of the Data Scientist, by scanning the code or going to the link on the screen here in the screen. And as always, thank you for joining us, and be sure to stay tuned to the next episode on the hour with an outlook on agriculture for 2021.